So warm welcome to Africa 360. We bring you news and views on the continent you won't see anywhere else, focusing on a distinctly African perspective. I'm Chris Maroleng and you're watching Africa 360. In this week's edition, he was once one of Kenya's poorest, with a very bleak future ahead of him, but a good Samaritan offered assistance, and that one act of kindness has changed his life completely. This week on Africa 360, we bring you the inspirational story of a human rights activist, Chris Mburu.
I mean, this is somebody who has meant so much to your life, somebody for whom you have dedicated a foundation, somebody in whose name you're educating hundreds of kids, yet you have never met him.
Chris Mburu grew up in a rural village in Kenya. His story is indeed a microcosm of poverty in many parts of the African continent. But a random act of kindness changed his life completely. It allowed him to complete school and tertiary education. Mburu is now a human rights lawyer for the United Nations, all thanks to a generous Holocaust survivor. Chris Mburu grew up in a Catholic family, but one that was incredibly poor. Unable to pay for an education, his mother sought help from local priests. But that also proved to be a futile exercise. One day, a Swedish woman named Hilde Back heard of Mburu's plight and decided to help. She began to send $15 a month to pay for his education. Chris excelled at secondary school and went on to study at the University of Nairobi. With Hilde Back's help, he went on to study at Harvard University in the United States. He then graduated in 1993 and soon worked for the UN as a human rights lawyer. Chris founded the Hilde Back Education Fund in 2001, and he dedicates his time and resources to educating children from his village. Chris Mburu's story has been captured on film, and this film was entitled A Small Act. It chronicles his search for Hilde Back, whose kindness gave him a priceless gift of education. Chris Mburu, thank you so much for joining us on Africa 360.
Well, thank you for having me. Very excited.
You know, you've got an interesting personal story that is, I'm sure, unique to you in many ways, but to many Africans, there's a resonance in it, in that many Africans have traveled the journey that you have. And here I'm relating to a formative chapter in your life that has brought you to where you are today, the manner in which you were assisted and giving help. Just tell us a little bit about what happened at that time.
Well, it was very difficult for me when I was growing up. I grew up in a very poor environment. My parents were very poor, and so was everybody around me in the village. You know, I grew up in a village where, you know, nobody really had anything you can call wealth. Kids, you know, there was no running water, no electricity. Kids had difficulties making it to school because we had to pay to attend primary school. Yeah. And so, you know, we didn't wear shoes to school. I didn't wear shoes until I was 10. So that's the context in which I was growing up. So the fact that somebody got me out of that situation is what makes me...
And it's exactly that, Chris. The fact that although you may have been in a very disadvantaged and impoverished community, someone reached out their hand at a very important time and almost changed your life.
And this is really what my whole life story is about. And this is why I like telling it. And this is why I decided to do something about it, because it really touched me that this woman, her name is Hilde Back, living in comfort in Sweden, decided to reach out and help a poor child struggling to survive in Africa. And, just the thought of it, she didn't even want that acknowledged. She didn't even, she wasn't looking for anything back. She just wanted to reach out to somebody who was in need. And she was given a list of kids who were bright and struggling in school. And she just picked me out of a list and said, I want to support this kid. And she supported me throughout my primary school, throughout my secondary school. I mean, it's amazing for somebody who is a total stranger. I didn't know who she was at the time. She used to. I was shown a little picture of her, and just some white lady that I had never met, and that I actually didn't meet for another almost 30 years.
Jeez.
So it's just this whole idea that somebody can reach out to somebody they totally don't know and change their life.
Did you eventually get to meet her? And what was that interaction like?
Well, I eventually got to meet her, and this is how it happened. I mean, as I have told you, throughout the period she was helping me, the image I had of her was an image in a black and white photograph that she had sent to me in a letter. So this was, for me, this was the woman who had changed my life. But I'd never met her. And then, as fate would have it, I lost her address along the line. So by the time I was thinking that I need to go back home and do something in her name, I actually didn't have her contacts. And it took a long process. It took the intervention of the Swedish ambassador in Kenya to locate Hilde.
Yes.
I was ambassador here in Nairobi a couple of years in the end of the 90s, and I got this letter from Mburu asking me if I could find Hilde Back.
So finally she was located, and I thought the best thing that I can do is get her to Kenya so that she can see what her name has done to other people, to me and to the kids that the foundation supports. So I invited her to Kenya, and it's in that context that I met her. This was over 25 years after she had started helping me. I had never met her. You can imagine I went to the airport holding a sign with her name. This is somebody who had meant so much to me, yet we had not physically met. So you can imagine what I was feeling as I stood at the Nairobi airport waiting for her to arrive.
What were you feeling?
I was overwhelmed with emotion. I mean, this is somebody who has meant so much to your life, somebody for whom you have dedicated a foundation, somebody in whose name you're educating hundreds of kids, yet you have never met her.
And what did she say about you, about the foundation, and about the works that you had done?
She was simply overjoyed. She did not believe that it was. At first, she thought it was a prank.
At first, I thought it was a joke because I had just forgotten about Chris and things like that. I was thinking, are they talking about me or what are they talking about? Because I couldn't really believe that they were starting something in my name.
And then she realized, it was the ambassador calling her and telling her about that kid that she had supported in Kenya. And she says that she was so totally moved. She couldn't believe it. And then the whole trip. At this point, she was 80 years old. Yeah. And I paid for her ticket to come to Kenya. Yes. And we had a big ceremony for her in the village. And the whole thing was like an out-of-body experience for her. She says, I discovered a home that I never knew existed. Because she came to my village and the entire village came out. And, she was robed in traditional garb and, women were singing and men were doing skits, and it was just wonderful. Philanthropy is not about what you have. in your hand or in your bank account. Philanthropy is what you have in your heart.
But here's the thing, Chris. Your story doesn't end there, because in this giving, there were lessons for you.
Right.
You seem to have learned something from it, I think.
Big lesson.
What was
you
that?
got it, give it to somebody else.
And how did you do that in your personal space?
Well, I decided, I kept thinking, this is amazing what's happening to me. Some stranger has walked into my life and changed it. How can I possibly make it up? How can I thank her enough? I can't thank her by giving her money. She doesn't need money. She's living in Sweden. She's not facing the same difficulties I was confronted with.
So what was the answer?
The answer was that, I need to do this to somebody else. But then who should I do it to? And because I kept going back to my village, my life progressed. I studied, I finished my primary school, I finished my secondary school with her help. I was able to go to the university. I studied law. I became a lawyer. I went to one of the best universities in the world, Harvard Law School. And after that, I told myself, I need to do something about this. I need to help somebody else.
Yeah.
And because I kept going back to my village, and I realized that there were so many kids facing the exact difficulties that I had faced at their age. And I told myself, this is the way to answer for the generosity that I received. And so I decided I was going to help the kids in my village who were struggling with school fees to support them financially.
But here's the interesting thing, and we'll go back to your story a little bit more, that your story is one that is not just unique to your particular village in Kenya, or indeed to any other particular village in many other parts of the African continent, but it is something around the sort of despair and deprivation that many young Africans go through, to the extent that talented Africans like yourself fail to get the opportunities that you have.
Right.
But there's another lesson as far as I'm concerned, which is that it is in that giving, sometimes defined as philanthropy, that we actually are able to change lives and make people's future that much more brighter.
You are totally right. And one of the things, that you mentioned, opportunity is everything.
Yeah.
There's so many kids out there who are struggling out here in South Africa, everywhere in the continent and elsewhere, who are struggling. All they need is a break, the kind of break that Hilde Back enabled me to have. All they need is an opportunity. So when you present an opportunity to someone, watch the results.
But here's the thing, Chris. When we think of people who give opportunities, it is not like the Chris's sitting here today. We think of, people like Bill Gates, maybe Patrice Motsepe, Aliko Dangote, people with money. Doesn't it mean that it is the rich who must give? And
No.
Isn't that what's been happening on the continent?
There's a distorted notion of philanthropy. And this is actually what I am trying to correct, and that with a lot of people in Africa are beginning to correct that. The perception that you only give because you have a lot. And that's been the context in which philanthropy has flourished. And that's why, since I started running my foundation, I come across people who tell me, Chris, I would like to support your foundation. One day, when I'm rich, I'm going to support your foundation. And I tell them, listen, all you need to do is support one kid. Yeah. And you've done it. We think of philanthropy as that thing that we're going to do when we make it really big. Mm. We think of Bill Gates. We think of the Oprah Winfrey's. And sometimes I think that the big givers sometimes create a distortion that prevents the small givers from participating. And actually, I think that in philanthropy, it's not about the big givers. It's about the multiplicity of small givers.
And in actual fact, let's go back to that village that raised you.
It's called Mitahato. Very proud of that village.
Let's talk about that village, because there's something unique about it, but at the same time, it is something that is very familiar to many communities throughout Africa, in that, in actual fact, I'm sure even within that village, there were random acts of kindness, random acts of generosity that in many instances would not be defined as philanthropy, but in many ways also led to you developing a culture and a self-awareness of what it means to give.
That is actually right to the point, because when I was growing up, I was surrounded by generosity. I was surrounded by poverty, but at the same time, I was surrounded by generosity. Now, people who think that you have to have a lot to be a philanthropist would not understand that concept, where you have a lot of poverty, but you have a lot of generosity. We had people, I grew up in a village where people who had absolutely nothing would open up their doors and bring in destitute children. And, you know, where if you know, a relative's kid, you know, a relative died, you gladly took in the kid and educated the kid with the little that people in the village had. They had open arms. I grew up in a village, even my poor mother, my mother who could not, you know, did not have the support that she needed to bring us up. I saw her doing things to other people. That shocked me. And I was wondering, why is she doing that? She can only do that because she has the heart. So philanthropy is not about what you have in your hand or in your bank account. Philanthropy is what you have in your heart.
Here's the challenge, Chris. When we think of philanthropy, generally speaking, we normally think of people like, you know, Hilde Back. They're in Sweden. Better off, not necessarily the most rich person in Sweden giving. It's normally the white hand that gives. It is the global north that gives. And it is the poor brown or black people of the less developed world who receive. In my view, what the story that you have just told me about that village that you came from actually has many lessons for us, which means, isn't it time that we began to redefine our understanding of philanthropy?
It is time to redefine our understanding of philanthropy. And one of the things that I'm struggling to, again, correct through my foundation is this perception that we have to wait for handouts from outside, from external factors. And one of the campaigns that I have, for example, in Kenya and in Africa generally, is to make sure that the kids that we support actually have African and Kenyan role models. They don't have to think of, you know, getting relief from a person from Sweden or from a person from America. They have to understand that this can come from their own midst. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to really promote the role modeling so that these kids can see Chris handing out something to them. And then that creates a greater incentive when they have the opportunity to give themselves, to stretch out their hand to another person of their own community. So philanthropy, actually, the best way of doing philanthropy is starting at the base, you know, from community to community. And then, you know, you can stretch out depending on what means you have. We've been, we have a lot of supporters for our foundation. And we do have more supporters from outside the African continent. And I'm not very excited about this. I would like to change that dynamic.
Yeah.
I would like our kids to not think that they're getting from somebody because they're fabulously wealthy. I want these kids to see that I dipped my hand into the pocket and pulled out a few coins, and I didn't have much more. And that sends a better message than them receiving from Bill Gates, because they know that he's doing that because he has.
It was predicted by the African Development Bank that remittances would overtake overseas development assistance within the next 5 years. And now the interesting thing about it, Chris, is in my view, those remittances are from people themselves who are saying, we may not be with you at home, but we will send money. We will send some form of assistance, because from the communities that they came from, like that village that you come from in Kenya, it was ingrained in us the idea that we must not forget where we come from and we must give. What's your view on that?
People should help in contexts that they understand.
Yes.
When you're African and you're living in Europe or you're living in America, you remember exactly the challenges that you went through in your village. And this sort of replicates my life. This is it. I went to Harvard Law School. You know, I was out there in the States and I was having a great time.
Yes.
But I was thinking, this is not what reflects who I am. Mitahato, that village that I left years back, that is what I carry with me. Every situation I encounter, every experience I live through, I try to think, what about the people I left behind? And that's why I'm thinking this kind of philanthropy where the Africans are thinking about, you know, doing deeds back home, even when they're not physically present.
Yes.
It's very, very encouraging. I've actually been talking because since our film came out, we've been doing a lot of screenings in the US and in Europe. And so I get the opportunity to travel quite a bit and talk to people at these film festivals. And a lot of the Africans, this is actually something that really motivates me and encourages me. A lot of the Africans come to these screenings and they say, this is what I'm doing for my village. Now, I'm building them a water well.
You've raised another fantastic point about you, which is that a lot of people who could be watching this right now don't actually recognize that you're not just an awesome, you know, do-good giving guy, but you're also a movie star, right?
I have been featured in a movie. I'm not a movie star.
Tell us about that, about that movie.
Well, what happened was that, you know, some woman, her name is Jennifer Arnold, who directs films at Hollywood, heard about the story from one of my relatives, actually a cousin. And she thought that was a fantastic story. And she called me up and she said, I want to do a movie out of your story. And at first I thought, is she kidding? There's nothing to tell here. I'm only, you know, extending the generosity that I saw extended in my own village. But she insisted that it was a beautiful story. She wanted to tell it. And I gave my permission for the story to be told. And she had predicted that it was going to do well, and it did far better than we all expected. Amazing. It became a big film. It premiered at Sundance Film Festival, which is one of the biggest in the industry, and has gone on to win many, many awards, was nominated for an Emmy Award. So it helped us also send the messages that we wanted to do. There's nothing like film when you want to send a message. What
a fantastic place for us to end this conversation with you. Chris, it's really been an honor to have you here on Africa 360, and we wish you all the best in all your endeavors in making things better for Africans. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Chris Mburu, that's indeed a very inspirational story, and it reminds us particularly during this time of giving, the importance of giving that little that may have a significant impact on the lives of those who receive those gifts. That does bring us to the end of this edition of Africa 360. I would really like to thank Chris Mburu for taking the time out to talk to us here on Africa 360. What an incredible story indeed. You can join the debate on Africa and indeed tell us what you think about the importance of giving. And you can do this by liking our Facebook page or tweeting us your views at A360_ENCA. You can also always send us an email at africa360@enca.com. So until next time, when we look forward to bringing you Africa like you've never seen it before.